Okay, good evening everybody, and thank you again to the Wake County Beekeepers for hosting this online webinar. Even though NC State is located in Wake County, to be fair to all the other counties, this webinar is going to be in the same format rather than being presented on stage and film. This is something that's delivered through the Collaborate platform, and so they are broadcasting it just like at least the Rockingham County Beekeepers and the Guilford County Beekeepers, as well as many others who have joined us as individuals as well. So thank you all for attending, and I hope that we'll be able to have a good discussion this evening. Thank you especially for Sarah Myers, the president of the Wake County Beekeepers, who invited me some time ago, and along with the other folks there in Wake County, helped to set this up and to choose the title. And especially, we went back and forth over many different topics, and became readily apparent that there's a lot of interest and a lot of need out there for beekeepers, new and experienced. I was going to say new and old, but then that sounded that was not what I meant. So what I really mean are for new beekeepers and for experienced beekeepers, we all need resources. We all need more information. We all need more education and more available resources out there for us to tap into to grow and to evolve as effective beekeepers. And so part of our mission here at NC State is to tap into that and to try and provide that information, because we believe, our philosophy is that knowledge is power, and so trying to collect that information and to make it readily available to beekeepers in different ways is always a challenge, and there's never enough. It's always very, very difficult, but we hope with the advances in technology, given the limitations of the current political realities, I think we have some things that we offer here at NC State that are going to be very useful going forward for beekeepers, and so I'd like to share some of that with you. Before we begin, though, I just want to make a couple brief announcements. First and foremost is the NC State NCSBA Spring Meeting, which is going to be in a couple months, but it's rapidly approaching. It's going to be March 6th through 8th in Wilmington, North Carolina. So it's going to be a great time to come down to the coast before all the beach tourists get there and everything. The organizers have put on a really fantastic meeting. It's, I believe, one day longer than is typical for the spring meeting, so they're really trying to provide more content and more speakers. They have the lineup who is speaking on ncbeekeepers.org, and I believe registration is already available, so if you want to start registering for that, please do so. Also, not listed here, but also this time of year, if you go on to ncbeekeepers.org, you will see that there are many different bee schools that are being offered right now. Way too many to mention. There have been some that have been mentioned on the chat board here. So if you're interested in bee schools, most of them are beginner bee schools, but even some advanced bee schools, be sure to check those out to see if there's any listed in your area. For those newcomers to beekeeping, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this later on in this presentation, is that NC State is offering a Bees Bee School offered through our Beekeeper Education and Engagement System. And that's something that is being offered for the second time. So last year we had our maiden voyage of our online bee school. And if you need more information about that, you can find that off of our website. And we'll be discussing the Bees Network throughout this presentation here. Now, I'd like to preface this with a graph that is presented in many different presentations when it comes to honeybees and apiculture, and that we know that the number of honeybee colonies in the U.S. has slowly declined over the last generation or two. to the point where we really only have about 2.5 or so million beehives in the United States, from a height of about 6 million at the end of World War II. And this is caused by many, many different problems that we are all familiar with as beekeepers. Colonies have been dying off at alarming rates for a lot of different reasons, both known and unknown. Nutritional problems, there's a whole complex of viruses that are out there that are very, very problematic. Pesticides, both those that are in the field that the bees are coming into contact with, as well as the pesticides that beekeepers themselves have been using. These gut parasites, nosema has been very challenging, resurging disease that has been very problematic for beekeepers. And then, of course, public enemy number one, which is the varroa mite, which has been incredibly devastating for the last almost 30 years. So these myriad problems that beekeepers have been experiencing really manifest with these increased colony losses, and this makes beekeeping a real challenge. And so that's what makes having information about beekeeping and what we can do as beekeepers to assist the bees to stay healthy and productive is all the more important. This is a figure that has been widely disseminated in the last couple of years, showing this mortality every single year hovers around 30%. So there have been these surveys that have been done the last 6 years or so that really show that the number of losses, the percent of the honeybee population that is lost every single winter is around 30%. In these surveys, the question is posed to the beekeepers, well, how many honeybee colonies could you lose where it wouldn't really be problematic for your operation? And that number hovers around the 15% range. So we're, in essence, losing twice as many honeybee colonies as what our beekeepers deem sustainable. So this is clearly something that is we're not able to do in the long run, and we really need to come up with ways to mitigate these problems that beekeepers have been experiencing. So enter in the manner by which these colonies are dying off. That is, in these surveys, you ask beekeepers what percentage of your colonies have you lost. And in fact, before the meeting began tonight, we were having an informal chat online with the beekeepers that had logged on, and we took a very, very quick straw poll and asking how many beekeepers have lost more than half of their colonies. And fortunately, less than 10% of the beekeepers in our little informal poll there had lost more than half of their colonies. Most others lost less than that. And so if you poll all of the beekeepers nationwide and ask them what percentage of their hives have they lost, about a quarter of them lose only about 14% or less of their total number of beehives. Another quarter of them, however, lose more than half. And so what this affords us, the fact that some beekeepers lose within an acceptable margin of their beehives, whereas other beekeepers lose a totally unacceptable proportion of their bees. The question is, what can we learn from these beekeepers that aren't losing as many of their colonies, and what can these beekeepers that are losing more of their colonies learn from them? Or vice versa, what is it about these operations that result in a high loss of colonies that these beekeepers, maybe they're just lucky for the moment and that is something that they need to avoid? So this is where the sharing of information is really, really critical. So why do we have that difference between the upper quarter and the lower quarter? We don't really know, but the beekeepers themselves do. They knew what they did that particular year that resulted in either a heavy loss or a light loss. And so by sharing that information, we may actually be able to learn from each other so that we can overall better improve our beekeeping management. And so this is where the Bee Informed Partnership comes into play. So this is a USDA-funded extension project that is run through the University of Maryland, but it has cooperators all across the country, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And the motto of the group is using beekeepers' real-world experiences to help solve beekeepers' real-world problems. And by doing so, by surveying beekeepers and interacting with beekeepers, collaborating with beekeepers, where we can then collect that information like data and then be able to disseminate those data back into these tangible, realistic findings so that beekeepers can make informed decisions about what management practices work and what management practices don't, so that they can improve their overall management practices and therefore mitigate perhaps some of these colony losses. So that's exactly what is going on, in the sense that there are all sorts of there's all sorts of information about beekeeping out there that are disparate from each other and not connected in any way. There are diagnostics that are being taken by beekeepers themselves, by apiary inspection teams. That information is a wealth of data, but they often kind of sit isolated on their own. There are these national surveys where they are collecting data at a national level to try to monitor diseases, and in particular for aphis, they are looking for new introductions of perhaps more potent parasites and pathogens that we want to avoid at all costs. There are also online tools that beekeepers have been using. All of this is data information about our bees. And so the idea of this Bee Informed Partnership is to consolidate all of that information into one huge big database, as well as to engage in their own management surveys and management survey tools to be able to collect all of this data, make it all standardized so that we're comparing apples to apples rather than apples to oranges, and then using reporting techniques be able to get that information out to the beekeeping community so that they're going to be able to make informed decisions based on the data that's being collected. So that in essence is what the Bee Informed Partnership is really all about. So who is doing this? Who's actually doing a lot of the heavy work? Well, there's far too many people to mention here. It's a collection of about, I think, 17 different institutions that have been collaborating and working on this in various different aspects. But it's really being run through the University of Maryland and by this guy right here, Dr. Dennis Van Engelsdorf. And so he's the project director and the one who's really leading all of this. And we're working collectively and collaboratively trying to take into account all of these different facets to what this project is all about. Of course, there's all the people who are doing the heavy lifting behind the scenes, and again, far too many to mention, but let's just suffice it to say that there's a very large team of really excellent scientists, beekeepers, and all of the above who are working hard on the Bee Informed Partnership. If you want to see their full bios, just go to www.beinformed.org so you can see what everybody is up to and what each of our charges is. But in a nutshell, just to give a very brief overview of what the approach of the Bee Informed Partnership is, it's really centered on having this tiered measurement system of surveys, mostly, of data collection, as well as assimilating these other databases that I mentioned before, but actually going out and systematically getting more data so that we can bolster that database and make it as robust as possible. So the first tier is what's known as the Annual Winter Loss Survey. And so this is an online survey through beinformed.org. And this is issued every April, And this is the survey from which these data from that figure were generated, for example. So this is a survey, volunteer survey, an anonymous survey, as are all of these, where beekeepers will go on and they will be asked a series of questions and trying to get to the essence of how many honeybee colonies they lost the previous year. So this is asked in April rather than, say, now in January, because a lot of beekeepers don't know what their losses are right now. It's still too cold to go into their apiaries and be able to check to see how many colonies have been lost. It's also can be difficult to tease apart, well, what colonies died during the winter versus which colonies died as they were growing during the summer. And so, you know, there's a difficult time there, and so that's a pretty good cutoff, I think, for most of the country. So that annual winter loss survey is something that I think most beekeepers are familiar with by seeing some of these reports that are very widely broadcast in the media every year. The Tier 2 survey is very similar in the sense that it's an annual management survey. This is also done in April. And this is in addition to the shorter winter loss survey, which is focusing really on the colony mortality every single year. The management survey is asking much more questions about what treatments have been used, did you move your bees that year, where were they placed. There's a whole series of different aspects of beekeeping management that are asked within this survey. So it's a much larger survey. They try to be as painless as possible, but as you can imagine, there's a lot of different wrinkles to how we keep bees nationwide. And so a lot of the pertinent questions and information about what we as beekeepers do to our colonies is captured in this particular survey tool, and then trying to tie those things together so that if a beekeeper fills out the winter loss survey as well as the management survey, then we're going to be able to start seeing these associations between doing X, Y, and Z results in lower colony losses versus A, B, and C results in higher colony losses. And that's very powerful information from which we can all benefit. Tier 3 of the original plan was this bi-monthly longitudinal survey, which in essence was trying to get beekeepers to answer one of these management surveys every 2 months throughout the course of the season to get much more detailed and accurate information about what they're doing. The thing is, though, is that that was discontinued largely from survey burnout. I think a lot of the participating beekeepers, they really meant well, but they just couldn't afford to do that every 2 months, and it was just kind of too onerous for them. So that actually, Tier 3 has been discontinued, at least at this point. Tier 4 is a monthly disease and management monitoring survey. In essence, what this is doing is asking participating beekeepers to sign up and voluntarily take samples of their colonies every single month and answer these survey tools. And in essence, there's these tutorials on the website that kind of walk them through about how exactly they need to sample and measure their colonies. And in essence, it's a citizen scientist project where participating beekeepers can measure their own colonies and report that information back to the Bee Informed Partnership. And the more participating beekeepers that we get, we can see if there are hot spots in the country of different diseases, whether there are changes over the course of the season in one area versus another. And so again, it's very powerful sharing collected data by the beekeepers themselves. Tier 5 is very similar to the Tier 4 disease management survey, but in this case, there are these several tech transfer teams that are out in the field. These are paid employees and absolutely vital to the overall functioning of the Bee Informed Partnership, where they are out with the beekeepers themselves doing the collections, not just relying on the beekeepers to do the collections and send in the data, but those tech transfer teams are actually going out and doing the collections and collecting the data themselves. So it's very accurate, it's very repeatable, because the same people are doing the same measurements time after time. These tech teams are set up strategically to help beekeepers that are in places where are going to have the greatest impact on the overall honeybee population. That is, queen breeders and a lot of these commercial and migratory beekeepers that are so important for our pollination system. So there's a tech transfer team in Northern California where there's a hotbed of queen producers. There's one in the upper Midwest where there's a huge contingent of honey producers. There's a new tech transfer team that is opened up in the southeast, in Florida, and Georgia, and they also service beekeepers in Southern California. There are new transfer teams that are talking about opening up in the Pacific Northwest and in Texas. And so these are things that are being funded by the beekeepers themselves, where they come together and they actually pay for these tech transfer teams to help them in their operations, but then they're also assimilated with the Bee Informed Partnership so that those data can be harnessed and captured. And then finally, the Tier 6 survey is about annual pollinator availability. That is, in March usually is when these have been launched, is trying to gauge how many honeybee colonies are out there available for their pollination services in various crops. This can get very complicated very quickly because migratory beekeepers are moving colonies all around, but it's one of these things that's really critical to understand if there's going to be honeybees in short supply or whether they're going to be plentiful. And so this can help the management decisions of beekeepers that if there's a paucity of pollinating units in one area, they might prefer to go to that area rather than to another area where there's more competition among pollinators. And so this is something that growers as well as beekeepers will find very useful going forward. So just some examples. We're about 2.5 years through this 5-year grant, and the overall goal of the Bee Informed Partnership is to get this up and running so that it's a self-sustaining model. So there are fees built into this, not the surveys. The online surveys are free, but for the tech transfer teams and other aspects, where hopefully this can be something that will live long beyond the life of the 5-year grant. And so as those data are being collected and assimilated, again, the main aspect of the Bee Informed Partnership is to provide that information back to beekeepers so that they can make relevant decisions in their beekeeping. So this is an example of the management survey, that Tier 2 survey talking about different management practices. And there are so many beekeepers all across the U.S. that have provided information within these survey tools that it can be broken down by region. So there are different regions of the country, obviously, that have different aspects of their beekeeping, that beekeeping is not the same everywhere. And so if you want to break it down by our region here in North Carolina, you can actually find all sorts of different reports that are automatically generated by the responses of the people, of the beekeepers who responded to that management survey in each year. And so it can be broken down by all sorts of aspects like disease control, the demographics, feeding, nutritional issues, honey and the placement of hives relative to different crops. And so you can click on any of these and they will automatically generate reports that provide that information back to the beekeeper. Here are 2 such reports that I find very, very interesting that I just pulled off today. The one on the bottom here, on the y-axis, is the percentage of the deceased colonies, that is the mortality of the colonies within the operations that are being surveyed. and it shows on the x-axis the different mite control products that are used, from the new formulation of Amitraz, Apiguard, Apolite Bar, which are two thymol products, Coumaphos and fluvalinate, which are by and large no longer effective miticides, formic and oxalic acid, and then this last one is sucroside that practically nobody really ever uses anymore. And what these bars show is the blue bars as if nothing is used, what the colony loss of beekeepers who didn't use any mite control products versus those that used this particular product, and then compared to all other products in the yellow bars. And so what this shows is the efficacy of these different mite control products in our particular area. So this is not nationwide, this is specific to the Southeast region. So it's starting to get very, very relevant to us as beekeepers as far as which products we think we might want to use in our area, because it seems to be more efficacious than perhaps beekeepers in other areas, or products that don't seem to be working at all. The top report I find incredibly interesting. It's very germane to our beekeeping of what we want to start up in our colonies coming up this spring. And what it is the percent of the colonies that died over the course of the year that were started in different ways. Either they were hives that were purchased from somebody else, they were installed swarms, they were packaged bees, or they were your overwintered hives that you split and made two colonies out of one. And what I find really amazing here is that the mortality of those that started packaged bees, so if they started their hives from packaged bees, their mortality was over 50% compared to those that did not start their colonies on packaged bees. The opposite is the same is true for splitting. Splitting can actually be pretty detrimental to the colony. If you didn't split your bees, then you had a higher level of mortality than if you did split your bees, which is again very interesting. So it really shows that we really need to get off of this the package problem, in the sense that packaged bees, the mortality is a lot higher. It's just very stressful to start out colonies with packages. So this is just an example, just two examples of the many different reports that are generated through this huge database that's being compiled by the Bee Informed Partnership. So I really encourage everybody to go to beeinformed.org and just start mining the information that's contained on there, because again, information is power, and we're all looking for more information, whether you're a new beekeeper or an experienced one. So how can you help? Well, of course, help participate in the surveys. If you can go to beeinformed.org when the open period for especially the winter loss survey and the management survey, you can go on and you can participate and help add your own data, and then be able to benefit from everybody's information at the same time. So be sure to do that if you can. Now, I should say that there are some other initiatives that are underway within the Bee Informed Partnership. This is just a couple of them. They have these emergency response kits that are now available, and these kits are all-inclusive. They have boxes, sugar candy, measuring scoops, postage labels, all sorts of things that are pre-packaged. And in essence, if you request them, they are sent to you with instructions of how to sample your colonies. And what they want is for you to sample 8 strong colonies that in your operation that you don't think are a problem, and then 8 weak colonies that you think are a problem, that you think that they are poisoned somehow, or they're dying from some sort of disease. You need some sort of comparison, so you need those strong colonies. but then sampled those 8-week colonies, and then sending those back, overnight those samples back to the University of Maryland and to NC State University, and we will measure the various disease levels within those colonies. So specifically Nosema spore counts, varroa mites, honeybee tracheal mites, and viruses. There's also an option for measuring different pesticides. This is especially true, and a lot of times these emergency response kits have been invoked by beekeepers who suspect that their colonies have been poisoned in some way. And so there's also a possibility in part of a kit where you can ask to sample bee bread out of your colonies, and then those will get sent to a third place where the pesticide analysis will be completed. So these response kits cost $80 if you just want the disease analysis, and they cost $760 total if you want the disease analysis and the pesticide analysis, because the pesticide analysis obviously is a very sophisticated GC mass spec chemistry and analysis that takes a lot higher inputs. So this is something, it's a service. Again, it's a service that can be used particularly in times of trouble if beekeepers really need a very quick answer as to why they think that their bees are having problems. There's a chat question here from Carolina Bee Company, who said it would like to see the package success broken out by month. Yeah, so that's another thing that's possible. I don't think that these are automatically generated in the data. That is, you might not be able to find those reports on the website now, but certainly those data are embedded in the database. And so one could very easily go into and see when you install your package and how, you know, what your likelihood of success is. Because you're right, early packages have, super early packages have a high rate of failure. There's that kind of sweet spot right in the middle. Packages started too late, probably don't have enough time to get established. So I'm sure those data are there. And in fact, as part of the Bee Informed Partnership, there's some members of the tech transfer team that are going to be doing their graduate theses, mining this data set to try and get even further into patterns like that, that again will be very informative. But my guess is your suspicion is right. So just to give a little overview of our small component of this huge initiative of the Bee Informed Partnership, I want to introduce somebody who shouldn't be a stranger to the Wake County beekeepers. She is your current treasurer. She is Margie Garganis. She is our genetics technician here in the lab. And she is not just a beekeeper for many years, a hobbyist beekeeper for many years. She's a fantastic geneticist. And she joined our team just over a year ago, and we have just really, really benefited from her professionalism and her real attention to detail and being able to work on this very collaborative, very complex project. So we really, really appreciate her being on board. We also have a new member, Mark Jandrisic, who just joined our team last month. He will be assisting Margie in doing the molecular analyses as part of the BIP, but also our new Queen Clinic that I'll speak on here in just a second. So most of what our portion of the data collection is to really work with these tech transfer teams who are out in the field working directly with these commercial beekeepers, and particularly the queen breeders, and sampling those colonies so that they send them to us on dry ice. They send samples of these colonies to us, and then we do a virus quantification of those colonies. And the effort of this is to try and work with the queen breeders so that they could hopefully perhaps select colonies that don't have nearly as much virus in them, so that as they raise queens, we know that if a colony is infected with viruses, then when they graft larvae out of that colony, that larva has the virus, and therefore the adult queen has the virus. So it's a way that we might be able to start reducing the overall prevalence of these very murky but very important honeybee viruses within the entire honeybee population by specifically targeting these queen producers, so that they might be able to make good informed decisions and select the grafting sources that don't have as much virus. And so what Margie has been doing is going through and extracting the RNA of these viruses so that we can quantify them using these very sophisticated tools called quantitative reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. And that is this fancy way of just trying to figure out how much virus that these colonies have. And in going through this, very laborious and very sophisticated technique, we're able to provide these beekeepers with this automatically generated report. And so this is what Margie produces and sends back to the beekeepers when they send us in a set of colonies. We analyze them for 7 different viruses: acute bee paralysis virus, black queen cell virus, chronic bee paralysis, deformed wing, Israeli acute paralysis, cashmere bee virus, and sackbrood virus. And so all 7 of those are known to be economically important. We give them the baseline data. So this is the data of all 1,400 plus colonies that we have screened over the last 2 years, so that we know what the relative levels of these viruses are in this population. And we see that black queen cell virus is actually the most common. About 80% of the colonies have this particular virus. Deformed wing virus, which is that real calling card of varroa mites, that's only at about 51% or so of the colonies. But the distinction with that is that if those colonies have the virus, practically everybody in the colony has the virus. So there's lots of different dynamics of these different viruses. These reports then report the level of those viruses in this sample of, in this case, 10 colonies, of how many of the current colonies have these different viruses compared to that baseline. The second page of the report then reports colony by colony what those different levels are on a continuous scale, and so it then compares to that baseline, saying that, well, these colonies have significantly fewer viruses than average, or significantly higher, or not different from that baseline average. And so the beekeepers can then very quickly ascertain not only whether their overall operation has these important diseases, but which colonies they might want to choose from because they have lower levels of virus compared to others. And so this is, again, very, very important information that no beekeeper is able to measure in the field and able to just look at a colony and know how much virus is within those colonies. So this is something that is unknown to them, and that we're trying to provide that information to them as quickly as we can. Now, as I mentioned before, we have a new system that's both within the separate from and housed within the Bee Informed Partnership, very much within the same spirit, and that is a new clinic that able to test the reproductive quality of queens. This is in large part thanks to Project APIS-M, who have funded this new Nexalom vision machine, which automatically calculates and very accurately estimates the sperm viability of honeybee queens, and drones as well. The seed money for hiring Mark Jandrisic and getting this up and going this first year is by the California State Beekeepers, and so I want to give a shout out to them as well for really seeing the benefit of being able to have a queen clinic where we can fairly, within a few days, ascertain the reproductive quality of queens. What beekeepers are able to do is send us live queens. This is done a lot by beekeepers. You receive them in the mail. It's the same way. You can send them in to us in the mail. As long as the queens are alive, we can measure them for their insemination success. And so it costs about $5 per queen to ascertain whether she is morphometrically fit, that is, whether she's big, a good, presumably a good egg layer. Using this new machine, for only $15 a queen, we are able to very accurately determine whether her sperm viability is sufficiently high. As we all know, the queen stores the sperm within the queen spermatheca, and she can do so for her entire egg-laying lifetime. And so she can have a lot of sperm within the spermatheca, but if for some reason all of those sperm die, that is very problematic for the queen. And so a lot of beekeepers have been experiencing queen failure problems, and so this is a way to actually measure that and to ascertain whether a batch of queens are good or they're bad. Similar to the virus analysis, we can also do a disease analysis of those queens in case queen producers in particular are interested in measuring the viral loads and the nosema loads in their queens directly rather than just in the colonies that they have. And then altogether $85 per queen to do all of the above. And so this is something that is being launched this year, and we've already had, just today, I've already had 2 requests where we're going to have queens shipped to us this week and next week in order to take advantage of this. So I think this is something that all beekeepers will be able to use, especially if you have queens where you think that the queen is failing or the colony is not doing well because the queen is failing. This is something that you should be able to tap into if you want to verify that that is indeed the case. In doing so, much like for the viruses, we provide these reports where it gives the overall data of these queens back to the beekeeper, and it ranks them on this continuous scale so that you can see where your queens lie within other queens, and you kind of get a letter grade. In this case, the queens were sufficiently big, so they were of high reproductive quality because of their size, but they had very, very low sperm counts, less than 2 million sperm, and so that is not very good, and so overall the queens were not very good. This is very, very important information for these queen producers in particular to verify if a particular batch of queens is reproductively good or whether they're more questionable. So that's the Bee-Informed Partnership and the roles that NC State is playing in it. What I'd like to do now is to actually switch gears and talk a little bit more about the education side. So knowledge is power, and the Bee-Informed Partnership is trying to collect those data and to provide that information back to the beekeeper in a collaborative partnership way. But that's not always, having the information is only sometimes half the game. You also need to be able to have just new education and new topics that you need to learn about as you're a beekeeper, whether you're starting out or whether you've been keeping bees for a long time. There's always more to learn. We can always push ourselves to become a better beekeeper by becoming more educated. And so this new beekeeper education and engagement system, or the Bees Network, is entirely designed for that purpose. It's an online learning platform, learning environment that we have here at NC State as a resource for beekeepers as individuals and entire clubs. So it's meant for beekeepers at all levels, so it doesn't matter whether you're new or whether you're experienced. There should be some courses and opportunities on this education and engagement system for you to use. It is entirely internet-based, so one of the downsides of this is that there's no hands-on practical experience, but hopefully this will be able to service the education needs so that the hands-on experience is much greatly facilitated. And the way that it's broken down is that there's a curriculum, and this is the conceptual breakdown of the curriculum as we currently see it. So there's content on this system at the beginner level, at the advanced level, and what I call the ambassador level, because it's for those who wish to really give back, and this is kind of the engagement part of the beekeeper education and engagement system. There are three different tracks then. There's a track on biology, there's a track on beekeeping management, that is beekeeping, and there's a track on the honeybee industry. And so there's content in each of those three areas at each of these three levels. And so at the beginner level, there's a single course in each of those three tracks. So there's one course on basic honeybee biology, there's one on basic hive management, and there's one on the importance of bees to society. In the advanced level, there's lots of different courses. So each one of these numbers here represents a totally different course that is either offered or is hopefully soon to be offered, so that beekeepers that already know the basics, they can go, and if they're interested in learning about queen rearing, or if they're interested in learning more about parasites and diseases, or Africanized bees, or pheromones, there are courses that are on here that you can tap into and take. At the ambassador level, this is where I really hope to get this online learning environment going, where beekeepers start giving back to each other through different educational events, through the engagement of others, and the involvement in their own local beekeeping communities. And so it's a way that we can capture that type of service that is already very germane to a lot of the beekeeping culture in our community. Hopefully this just will bring it online. Now, what's been very popular, obviously, just like most beekeeper education events out there, is the beginner level. So these three courses, the one on honeybee biology, management, and industry, is broken down into many different lectures. There are about 15 lectures here total over all three courses. There's about 5.5 hours of content of me lecturing in front of a PowerPoint. And so it's something where it's a streaming video, so that beekeepers can go in and actually watch these different lessons, just like a distance ed course offered through NC State University. It's using much of the same platform called Moodle, which is this learning platform that is very, very helpful for online education. So this is what that Moodle platform looks like. This is just a screenshot of it. It's very, very, well, there's a lot of bells and whistles involved in it, but it's very simplified for the Bees Network, just so that beekeepers don't get too confused about it. But the middle part here is where the main content is. Again, these streaming video lectures, where you can watch them over and over again. You can pause and review. And then finally, at the end, there's actually an online quiz associated with each course that is really not so much as an assessment tool as it is a continued learning tool. So that it's one of these online quizzes where if you answer a multiple choice question incorrectly, it will tell you that you're wrong, but not only that, it will tell you why you're wrong, and then you have an opportunity to answer the question again, and then get partial credit for that question. So it's a way for you to actually interface and to study as you're actually being assessed. And if you score an 80% or higher, you get an electronic certificate with your name and your score on it, so that you have some proof that you've been through these courses and that you've gained that expertise. So it's one of these platforms where you can take it as an individual on your own time, at your own pace, It's very amenable for the individual level, but it's also really fantastic for groups where we have entire online bee schools where you're able to project this content to an entire group, not unlike what we're doing with this webinar format, and then be able to learn this content as a group, and then be able to interact as individuals online, or to be able to take these tests as a group. And so we've facilitated many different bee schools over the last few years using the content from this Bees Network. One thing that hasn't been tapped into as much as the beginner content are these more advanced courses, where I think more advanced bee schools could be offered using the content that's on this system, because I hear a lot of beekeepers that have been beekeeping for 1, 2, 3, or even 5 years, and they feel like they've gone to the bee school and they haven't been learning much beyond of that beginner content. And so this is perhaps an opportunity for more advanced content to be tapped into. So unfortunately, I'm kind of doing all of this on my own. We don't really have a whole lot of IT or infrastructural support to kind of get this off the ground. This is a real novel concept when it comes to education delivery of this information of these courses. And so pretty much there's an online system to pay for each course. Each course is $25 per person. You can pay via credit card, which then prompts me with an email to set you up within the system. I then email you back the logon information to the course or courses that you have provided the donation fee for, and then you can log in using that passkey information at your own volition. So it takes a little, it's not an immediate access to the course, unfortunately. I've been trying to get our IT folks to build that bridge, but for now, it's still pretty quick in prompting me with an email and then getting that information back to you. So the real great things about this online learning environment is that you really only need an internet connection and an email address. We're not storing a lot of information, personal information about you. You can set up one of these, an account on this Moodle system for free, and you can interact on some of the free courses all you want, and it really doesn't take a whole lot of inputs. The other really excellent thing about this is that it's a la carte. You can pick and choose exactly which courses you want. There's no mandatory where you have to take this course in order to take this course. There's no hierarchy to it. It's entirely a la carte. You can go at your own pace. You don't have to do it other than within the time frame. The access to the course obviously does have to sunset after a period of time. By default, that's 30 days, but if people need more time, that can be adjusted accordingly. But in essence, you can go through and take these courses on your own volition. And as I said before, it's really amenable to bee schools. And in fact, we're going to be there's going to be a Bees Bee School online next month that I mentioned early on in the webinar. So with that, that's kind of a two-pronged approach of two of the main aspects of what we're doing here at NC State when it comes to beekeeper outreach and information and education. The Bee Informed Partnership is this kind of nationwide effort to try to collect data and interface with beekeepers so that they can make better informed decisions about their management practices. And then the Bees Network, which are these new online courses that beekeepers of all levels are going to be able to take. I just want to note for you to save the date that our next webinar is going to be held on June 19th. It's going to be hosted by the Mecklenburg County beekeepers. We haven't chosen a topic yet, but if you enjoy these webinars, please go ahead and circle that date and stay posted onto our website for any further details, and we hope to see you then. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions that you might have. Again, if you want to ask with your microphone, go ahead and hit the talk button, or go ahead and type in your questions in the chat room, and I'll just scroll through those and try to answer them as they come in.
Dr. Tarpey, we are asking for questions. Give us just a second.
Okay, thanks. I see several people are typing away feverishly, but I haven't seen one hit the chat board yet. So there's a question by Everett who asked about the participation numbers, the number of beekeepers in North Carolina on the Be Informed surveys. And you guys should be proud. You're always either at or very, very near the top. North Carolina is one of the highest responding states in the country, which makes sense because we have the largest, most active, indeed the best beekeeper community in the nation. There is this interesting aspect about the database, however, is that most of the beekeepers that are responding to the surveys have small numbers of hives, whereas most of the colonies in the United States are owned by a very small number of beekeepers. And so we're trying to balance those two populations, where we want, for questions where we're asking about beekeepers, we need as many beekeepers as we can get. When we're talking about aspects of the overall population health, we need as many colonies as we can get. And so that's one reason why the tech transfer teams are interfacing directly with these larger scale commercial beekeepers, because that affects the overall population, which then helps us all. But yeah, you should be proud that North Carolina is very well represented on those surveys. But again, the more the better. I think the ideal would be for every beekeeper in the nation to be participating in these in some capacity. Other questions? I know that you have some.
Dr. Tarpey, this is Sarah Myers. We just want to thank you from the Wake County Beekeepers for allowing us to host this for you. And will this presentation be available for them to download after?
Yeah, so it will be available. It won't be a download, but you will be able to stream it, just like you're able to stream the webinar here. So I will be posting a link to that through this Collaborate system on our website for later viewing. So absolutely. And yes, thank you again for hosting us. Okay, so now I have a bunch of questions that are flying in now. The name of the report of the results of the management survey that was posted. One of them was, my goodness, I'm forgetting exactly what it was. There were many different reports that are out. So this is a list of all the different reports that are available. Each one of these is a link to a different report, and this is just cut off. It keeps going down. This one here, I believe, is varroa mite control product use by product. And then this one here, I believe, is further down on the bottom. It talks about colony installation or something like that. So, but you can explore all of these you want and take a look at the different data that are being generated by this. And so they're all on the same website. There's another question about the large versus small skew in the numbers. And the answer is yes. So that's really important statistically and for data, right? So what's being reported here are the number of colonies, right? So it's the total population versus the percentage within an operation, right? So that's why all of these reports that come out in the media, they're often these two different numbers. The average percentage loss, that is, you survey all the beekeepers, how many, what proportion of their hives died, and because that is skewed by smaller beekeepers, that number is often higher than the total loss of the population of honeybees, right? So the 30% loss that is given and has been reported over the last few years, that's the total honeybee population. That is, there are 30% fewer live-in bee colonies over the winter. If you ask the total percent loss average of beekeepers, it's more like 50%. That is, your average beekeeper lost about half of their colonies. And again, that's because it's skewed that most beekeepers have fewer colonies, and so they end up losing actually more hives on average. So that's a very important distinction that is definitely accounted for in these reports and in the press releases that go out, but oftentimes as that's further communicated, that nuance is often not there. So let's see. There's a question here about a product, Bee Shield, and whether I'm familiar with that. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with that. Is that a product, or is that a not even sure what that is. I have been seeing some kind of dubious reports that have been going around of people using electromagnetic waves to keep their bees healthy or something like that. That makes me very suspicious. But I haven't seen any kind of independent, objective, scientific papers on any of that. If that's the one that I'm thinking of. So I know that there's several bee groups here and many interested individuals who are active members of their local bee clubs. I would definitely encourage you, if you're looking, we're always looking for fodder at our monthly meetings. Beinformed.org is a great place to go if you want to start pulling off some of these reports and just projecting them and discussing them. It's a great way to start a discussion piece among the beekeepers. You can go topic by topic, one month to another. Just definitely utilize it as a resource out there as well for making your own decisions. As far as the Bees Network, again, this is something that is growing. I hope to get a lot more content up there, especially at the advanced level, where there's going to be lots of different topics that really should suit lots of different beekeepers. If anybody's interested in holding an online bee school or having some advanced content at their local meetings, I'd be happy to talk with you about that. But unless there are any other questions, again, thank you again, Wake County Beekeepers, for hosting this. I really appreciate it. Thank you for the other clubs that have decided to join in, as well as the individuals. And thank you for your attention.